Hello, macro students. Welcome to Unit 2 of our course. You've survived the first unit. There are 6 units total, 3 first quarter and 3 second quarter. So we're 1/3 of the way through the class. All right, so let's start with Module 45, Intro to Macroeconomics. And our question that we're working with is, what tools do we have to measure the economy with? So that is what we will be focusing on, our tools for measuring the economy to know if our economy is doing good or doing bad, if our economy is getting worse or getting better. All right, so we start out by defining macroeconomics, the branch of economics that studies the behavior of the economy as a whole. So microeconomics is going to study what that one business should do, what that one household should do. But macroeconomics is looking at the entire economy. How is it doing in general? What can the government do to influence it? Is it getting better for most people or getting worse for most people? So there are 4 big areas of macroeconomics. Today, in this module, I'm going to introduce those 4 areas to you. And then in the coming modules, we're going to go more in depth into them. All right, so first is business cycles, then economic growth, then price stability, which is talking about inflation and deflation, and then trade imbalances. But we're going to come back to that in a moment. First, we need to go through some of these words to know. So this first word is employment, and notice that the second word is unemployment. So employed and unemployed. Employed is talking about people who have a job. And then unemployed is a little bit trickier because it's not simply people who don't have a job. Because when we think about unemployed, we want to know who wants a job but doesn't have a job. And those are two, and that is different than just everybody who doesn't have a job. For example, my 11-year-old son does not have a job. My 96-year-old grandmother does not have a job. My 68-year-old dad does not have a job. And those 3 examples, none of them are looking for a job and none of them are trying to have a job. So when we talk about unemployment, we say it's people who want a job, comma, but do not have one, but don't have one. The unemployment rate is it is a percentage, the percentage of people who want a job but don't have one. And that is a very, very simple definition. We are going to go much more into detail about the unemployment rate and what that means, but for now, that's our simple definition. And then recession, that's an important term. That means a bad economy. So a recession is like a time when the economy is bad. And what do we mean by bad? Well, that means that there is a high unemployment rate. And that means that companies produce less stuff. And why are companies producing less stuff? Because people are buying less stuff. So companies produce less stuff and people buy less stuff. You're going to have to kind of squeeze it in there a little bit. Okay. And the biggest thing to remember about a recession is it gets a big old sad face. Not a good time. Okay, so when did macroeconomics become a thing? Like, when did they start to study the economy as a whole? When did they start to figure out um, how the government can influence the economy, or if the government should influence the economy? Well, it became a thing after the Great Depression. Or actually maybe during the Great Depression. But during the Great Depression, we had this huge recession. So big they called it a depression. And before that, the government had always taken what they called a hands-off approach to interfering or getting involved in the economy. They had always said, you know what, the economy, it runs on its own. It goes through some good times and some bad times, but it always works itself out. The government's place is not to manage the economy. But then the Great Depression happened, and President Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, you know what, we're going to try to influence this economy on the government level. We are going to try to put people to work. And that's the language we hear now, right? Politicians, members of the government are always saying, we're going to put people to work. And let's try to figure out this unit, what that means. But so it was, you know what? Let's add the word during to this, during/after the Great Depression. And then the government started to get involved in helping the economy. All right, page 2. Okay, so here is that business cycle. So on our list here, we're on page 1 where it said 4 big areas of macro: business cycle, economic growth, price stability, and trade imbalances. Now we're going to go through what those 4 things mean. All right, so the business cycle. Here we have a little, another little graph, a little picture, a little chart. And this one's called the short run or short-term business cycle. So on our y-axis, we have employment or production. So remember, 0 is here at the origin. So as we go up on this axis, we see that employment, meaning the amount of people who do have a job, is increasing. And that increases along with production. Production meaning the amount of stuff that businesses are making or are creating. And then on our y-axis, we have time. So it's saying over time, what happens with employment, what happens with production? Well, according to this line, over time, employment goes up, employment goes down. Production goes up, production goes down. And then we go down to our long-run business cycle. And so same thing, employment or production over here, time over here. But this is going to show even more time. And we see this business cycle just repeating over and over and over again. So it'll look like this: up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. But do you notice that the overall trend or direction of this, yes, it's going up or down, but over the long run, over many, many, many years, our overall trend is going up, which is important, because that means that our economy is getting bigger. And it's important that our economy gets bigger for 2 reasons. 1, we want to improve our lives. So, it's like if our economy gets bigger, then more people can own more things, like more people can have refrigerators and vacuum cleaners and TVs and all the things that we like in our lives. It's also important because our population goes up. And if our number of people is increasing, we need to have more stuff, a bigger economy to accommodate those more people. All right, so here it says macroeconomists so people who are economists, macroeconomists, they try to smooth out the business cycle. Why? Well, because recessions are really bad for people and they're really hard to get out of. So if we can avoid recessions, if the business cycle doesn't go down as much as it might, that's a good thing. And why are economies so bad for people? Because when the economy is bad, people lose their jobs, right? And we call that unemployment. So why is it bad? Because recessions lead to times of high unemployment where a lot of people who want and need jobs don't have jobs. And if you want and need a job, like that is huge if you don't have one, right? Like people who need a job but don't have a job, they're not okay, right? Like they can't provide for their families, they can't pay their bills, like that's not a good situation. So if macroeconomists can figure out how to make it so our recessions aren't so bad, that's what they want to do. And why are recessions so hard to get out of? Because it like spirals downward. So for example, let's say a company started to not produce as much stuff. Well, therefore they're going to lay off or, fire or lay off employees. They don't need those employees anymore. So that means that all of those employees that used to work for that company don't have a job. And you know what people who don't have a job do? They save whatever money they have. So that leads us to they're not going to buy as much stuff. Well, if they're not going to buy as much stuff, then the companies aren't going to produce as much stuff. And then more people are going to get laid off. And then more people aren't going to buy as much stuff. It's like this downward spiral. So once the economy starts to get bad and goes into a recession, it's hard to get out of that recession. Okay, I'm going to pause the video here. This is the end of Module 45, Part 1, and then we'll pick it up again with Module 45, Part 2.